guys, it's Colleen for Made for Mermaids. Welcome to day one of our Sierra sew along. I'm really excited to share this pattern and the sew along with you. Today we're going to work on printing our pattern pieces, assembling our pattern, and also cutting out our fabric. It's kind of a lot of front loading because I'm showing you all 6 bodice options on day 2 and day 3, so we gave a little bit more time for that. So the first thing that we want to talk about is making sure you measure your 1-inch square on your pattern pieces. You'll notice that on every page of your pattern piece there's a little 1-inch square, and you want to be sure to measure it every single time you print. And I know for most of us this is our handiest measuring tool, but it's really not what we recommend measuring your 1-inch square with, just because it's a little bit more flexible and so it's not quite as accurate. We really recommend a hard plastic ruler or a quilting ruler. You can see I can't find my regular quilting ruler, so I'm using this gigantic crazy square. But it still works, it's great. It's not flexible and I know that it's accurate, so you can see if I plop this down here, exactly 1 inch. We are good to go. I know a lot of us print in grayscale to save money, especially if you're ordering from a copy shop or something like Staples. Or even if you're just printing at home. I know a lot of people don't like to use up their color ink. So you can see, especially if you're printing either intentionally or accidentally, printing a lot of layers, you can see all those lines. It gets kind of confusing. So after you've checked your 1-inch square, before you cut any of your pieces out, over your specific size lines with a highlighter or a marker or something that will help you distinguish your lines. So you can see I went through on my key and I pulled the size 3 line, which is the darkest solid line there. And then I went through and I actually pulled it up on my computer monitor just to make sure I was highlighting the right lines, because especially you can see down here on the bottom of the bodice, some of the lines overlap, so I wanted to make sure that I was for sure getting the right lines. So definitely compare it to your computer screen, but then go through and just highlight all of your lines so that you make sure that you're cutting out your correct size, because that stinks if you get all the way to the end and you realize you cut out the wrong size. So I'm going to cut this one out really quick so I can show you my next little trick that I like to do. So I know it's so fun to watch people cut paper, isn't it? I promise I'm not cutting all my pattern pieces out on this video. I just want to show you one quick little thing that I like to do. So we'll finish cutting this out. Okay, so you can see I've cut my size 3 front bodice out on the flutter sleeve cut line. That's the outer line here. Now I've also cut the full bodice piece, but a lot of times I like to make multiple options of the same size, especially if we're in the middle of testing, or if it's a pattern that my daughter really likes or one that I really like to make for myself. So what I like to do, instead of printing out a ton of the same pieces, I just like to go in and snip just a little bit. So here I snipped where the cutout would be, and then I can just fold those little pieces back. So I have the full bodice piece, but I can also use it for the cutouts too. And sometimes you have to go back in and trim it a little bit more if it's not folded perfectly. And then you'll see that this inner line right there is where I would cut for the tank or the sleeveless bodice. So I'm going to do the same thing and just trim it, well, not trim it, snip it right up to the tank line. And this one, because it's a little bit of a curve, you kind of have to do a lot of little snips. And then I'll do the same thing. I'm just going to fold it back just a little bit. So there. Now I can also do the tank bodice or the flutter sleeve bodice using the same pattern piece. So it is a little bit of a time saver. And this is one of our hacks on the blog, but I also want to show you really quick, just in case you haven't had a chance to see our hacks on the blog. So the seam down the center was just a design element. It was just a choice that Megan made when she was designing the Sierra. And I know for some people, if you're using a custom panel or you're just working with a fabric where you can't get a good layout or you just don't like the center seam, it's really easy to remove. You just fold your bodice pieces 1/2 inch back and that will remove the seam allowance. And then instead of cutting 4 mirror images really, because you also need them for the lining, you would cut 2 on the fold. So I actually already cut it out. We'll pretend that I'm just now laying it out. Oh, it's all bunched up here. Well, goodness, it's not gonna straighten out. Okay, so we'll pretend that I've just cut that on the fold. I've folded my seam allowance back. I've cut it right on the fold. So when you open it up, you'll see that it's 1 full bodice piece instead of 2 that you then need to put a center seam on. So you would do the same for the lining pieces, and then if you wanted to remove the center seam on the back bodice pieces, you would do the same thing. So there's a more detailed tutorial for that on the blog if you wanted to check that out. I'll post a link in this blog post. And then the next thing is, if you are somebody that likes to hem your flutter sleeves or your romper bottoms, I know some people really prefer the finished edges, and it's mentioned in the pattern, but just in case you missed that part, it's designed to leave the flutter sleeves and the romper bottoms unhemmed. So if you decide that you want to hem them and you want them to finish at the same length that they're designed for, you'll want to add 1/2 inch. So I know it looks kind of crazy because I don't normally pin my pattern pieces like this anymore. But you can see I added 1/2 inch all the way around on the bottom of the flutter sleeve. So when I go to hem it, I'll have that hem allowance there. And you would do the same thing for the romper bottoms if you decide you want to hem them. You can just cut it as is, just know that it'll finish 1/2 inch shorter, which may not make a big difference to you on the flutter sleeve, but on those 4-inch inseam romper bottoms, it might be enough of a difference to add that little bit of extra. One last thing, on the skirt pieces, you really want to pay attention to the grain line and the stretch line that's on the paper pattern piece, because it's different than probably what you're used to. Just to quickly make sure you've got all your pieces cut, you should have 4 front bodice pieces, and that's 2 sets of mirror images. You should have 4 back bodice pieces, and again that's 2 sets of mirror images. You should have 2 waistband pieces, and then either 2 skirt pieces or 4 romper pieces. And again, make sure the romper pieces are 2 fronts and 2 backs, and those should also be mirror images. And then optionally, you'll have the flutter sleeves if you're doing the sleeve version. On the blog, there's a hack showing the bishop sleeve, and it makes a really cute fall or winter romper if you decide you want to use that sleeve instead of the included flutter sleeve. Later on this week, we'll show the hacks for Megan's great Vegas dress, and also what my husband likes to call my Darth Vader walkthrough romper. So stay tuned for that. Hopefully that helps clarify a couple things for day 1 for cutting and assembling your pattern pieces. And I hope you're excited for day 2, sewing up our bodices. See you tomorrow.